Welcome to Merge, Faith plus Work, a ministry of Without Walls. Today, we begin our monthly talks entitled Merge Talks. Be inspired as you listen to the Bible principles of integrating faith and work in your lives.
Hi everyone. It's been months since the COVID-19 pandemic has affected our way of life. For most of us, this pandemic has made our work harder. Whether you are a student who's now adjusting to online learning, or a housewife who now have to add teaching their kids to their many job descriptions, or an employee who faces shorter work hours and lesser pay, or an entrepreneur who needs to make the decisions in their business. You see, work has become more difficult, and so we ask the question, how can I find meaning in work? You see, most of us don't find meaning in work. Now, there's a difference between finding meaning and being happy in work. Meaning and happiness is different from each other. Happiness is associated with what you get from work, something triggered externally. This could be money, friendship, respect, privileges, and so on. And so one can be happy if you have this, but still not find meaning in what you do. On the other hand, finding meaning in work has more to do with the fulfillment in what you are doing, something triggered internally from your heart. And so, regardless of the external elements like the money you receive, you can have a sense of joy in fulfillment with what you are doing. Now, this is important for us to learn today, for this pandemic has affected the income that we are getting. And so, we need to find meaning in what we are doing now so that we can be fulfilled regardless of the income that we would get. And so, now, how can we then find meaning and fulfillment in our work? Key to this is knowing our purpose and what we are designed to do. This is why if you are using your God-given gifts in your work, you can find joy in what you are doing. But our gift is just a small picture of the bigger picture God has designed for us. Because we could be using our gifts at work now and find some joy, but as we all know, there is people around us who don't share the same joy that we have. They are the ones that just makes our work hard. This could be our boss, our clients, our co-workers. And if you look at the bigger picture, the system that we have to work with, these are the corruptions at our workplace. And so we need to see the bigger picture of what God has designed for us in order for us to find meaning in work despite the difficult circumstances we are facing. And this is what we will be talking about today, finding meaning in work. We discover this by knowing who God is and what He has set for us to do when He created us. Because when we are doing what we are supposed to do, we find joy from within our heart because it fulfills our purpose. And because this joy comes internally from our heart, we find meaning in our work despite the negative external circumstances we may be facing. And we learn about this from the Bible in Genesis 1. In Genesis 1, we have come to know this as how God created the world, the living creatures, and us humans. But Genesis 1 speaks so much more than just creation. This revelation by God is a response to the situation the people of Israel were in. What was their situation? The Israelites at the time of this revelation were not in the promised land. They were people in exile, and as exile, they were being ruled by kings that believed in false God, far different from the one true God. What is the difference? To give us an idea on the gods at that time, we can look at the ancient Near East myth of Enuma Elish. In that story, it tells us of multiple gods at war with each other. It tells us that the heavens and the earth were created out of evil and violence, and humans were created as slaves to the gods. This is a corrupted account of who God really is and who we are. And this results in a corrupted world at the time of writing of Genesis, where the kings ruled with evil and violence and where normal people are treated as slaves. This is far different from the righteousness and justice our true God desires in this world. Now, let me ask you, do we live in a world where there is righteousness and justice? Or do we still live in a world where there is evil and violence, where people rule unfairly, with us feeling like slaves? We only have to look at our workplace and our environment to see how corrupt the world is still. And so the situation of the Israelites back then is similar to us. We still have the same situation where Abraham, Moses, the prophets, and the other people in the Bible were in. We are exiles in this world. And so it is no wonder it is hard for us to find joy at work because, like before, we live in a corrupted world where we view work as a necessary evil that we need to do, where our boss at work treats us unfairly, where we sometimes feel like slaves working just to make ends meet. Now, if that is you, God has a message for you today. God's revelation back then gives us the same message today. In Genesis 1, we are told we are created in God's image. And through this, we get to know who God is and who we are to be. Knowing this would give us joy and meaning in our work. So what does this first chapter of Genesis tells us? First, it tells us that God delights in his work. Second, God allows his creation to flourish. And lastly, God invites us to participate in his work as his image on earth. This ultimately speaks of our purpose as the pinnacle of God's creation. And so let us begin with that God delights in his work. Verse 1 of Genesis tells us that God created the heavens and the earth. In succeeding verses, it tells us that God is the creator and owner of all things. He created the light, the heaven, the earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars, the birds and sea animals, and the land animals, and lastly, us humans, the pinnacle of his creation. From this, it is clear that God works. Creation is God's work, and according to Tim Keller, not only does God works, but finds delight in it. God delight in his work can be compared to how an artist finds joy in his masterpiece. Now I know this because my wife is a watercolor artist, and I have observed how she finds joy when she is working. You see, when she paints, she always takes a step back to assess her work. When she finds that it is good, there is that sense of joy in her. And because it is good, she continues with her work. She does this again and again until finally, when she has finished her last stroke in her painting, she takes a step back again to assess her work. And finally, she says it is very good. She then sits down, she gets a glass of wine, looks again at her work, and rests, delighting at the masterpiece that she has painted. Now, isn't that similar to how God works? When God created, he says, "Let there be," and creation happens. He then looks at his creation like an artist at his delights at his work and says it is good. And because it is good, he continues his creation. And finally, on the sixth day, he finished his masterpiece and says, "It is very good." On the seventh day, God rested from all the work that he had done. Now, one can only imagine that on that day of rest, God looked at his creation and just found joy and delight in the masterpiece he has created. You see, this is how work is supposed to be. Work is good and is to be delighted. We are to be like an artist and find joy in our work. You see, sometimes when we are struggling in our work, we think of work as a necessary evil that we must do. We do it only because we have to. We say things like, I don't like this job, but I'll do it because it pays good. Now, the danger if we have this mindset is that work becomes a necessary evil. We start to compromise at work because we think of it as separate from holy. We segregate Sundays from the rest of the week. We are holy on Sunday, but from Monday to Friday, well, we live a different life. But according to God's creation, it tells us that work is good and is not evil. Tim Keller has this to say: work was not a necessary evil that came into the picture later, or something human beings were created to do, but was beneath the great God Himself. No, God worked for the sheer joy of it. Work could not have a more exalted inauguration. And so, because God delights in His work, we should also delight in our work. Further, from the creation account in Genesis, we see that God allows His creation to flourish. From out of nothing, God created heaven and the earth. From without form and darkness, God brought order and light into the world. And so work is about bringing order to chaos, giving light to darkness. God made things better. His work is about making this world flourish. Further, this flourishment is not solely His work, but is also given to His creation. Walter Brueggemann says this: the relation of creator and creation creature in Genesis 1 is not one of coercion, it is rather one of free, gracious commitment and invitation. There is a sense of freedom in God's creation to flourish. When He creates, He doesn't say, "This must be." Instead, He says, "Let there be." God's creation is already very good, but He gives His creation the possibility of making it flourish. And because of this, Brueggemann states that life in its fullness is therefore possible. The fullness of God's creation is entrusted to the pinnacle of God's creation, us human. And God gives us His blessing to make His creation flourish. Genesis 1:28 says, "And God blesses them. And God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and of every living thing that moves on the earth." This is God's grace. Creation is God's gift, and He entrusts it to us. He creates something very good, and now God gives His blessing to make it flourish. And so, work is not just a task given to us that we must do. Work is about making things better. Because God allows His creation to flourish, we are to continue the good work God has already done. The outcome of our work should be one that makes God creation flourish. And because we are doing something for the betterment of this world, that there is this joy and fulfillment in what we are doing. Going back to what I said a while ago, God didn't say you must do this. Instead, He said, let them have dominion. This is an invitation for us to participate in God's work. Remember what I said in the beginning, that at the time of writing of Genesis, the ancient Near East myth tells us that people back then were created as slaves to do the work of the gods. Now, Genesis 1 refutes this. It tells us that we are not created as slaves. Instead, we are given the freedom to participate in a relational way with God's work. We are given the honor to further His creation, making it flourish. And so, there is dignity in the work that we are to do. Further, verse 27 says, "So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him, male and female He created them." This speaks of the all-encompassing dignified vocation that we are called to do. This speaks of our design and purpose on earth as the image of God. Now, what does it mean to be created in the image of God? In its original context, the term image of God is used by kings to assert their rule over the people. When the kings or rulers before us say that they are the image of God, what they are saying is that they are ruling on behalf of God. And so this is a powerful statement. With us created in the image of God. It means we, the people of God, who are living as exiles in this world, should be the one ruling the earth and reflecting God's reign, and not the current rulers we have now. As His image on earth, we are His representative or His stewards, and we are to reflect His rule on earth. This is the vocation that we are called to do. We are given the honor and dignity as God's stewards on earth to accomplish His purpose of making His creation flourish. And because this is all given to us by the grace of God, we are to give back the praise and honor to Him. N.T. Wright says this: the main task of this vocation is image bearing, reflecting the Creator's wise stewardship into the world and reflecting the praise of all creation back to its Maker. Further, he states, this is how creation was designed to function and flourish under the stewardship of the image bearers. Humans are called not to just keep certain moral standards in the present and to enjoy God's presence here and hereafter, but to celebrate, worship, procreate, and take responsibility within the rich, vivid, developing life of creation. According to Genesis, this is what humans were made for. This answers the question, what is my purpose here on earth, that gives meaning not just in work, but in our very existence. Our purpose here is to worship God and to celebrate His creation by being His representative on earth to accomplish His purpose for this world. Now, how does this give meaning in work? By integrating our faith and work. You see, you can fulfill your purpose of being God's representative in your workplace. You don't have to change your job. You can accomplish your purpose in your context. You do this by being God's representative in your organization or your school or in your house and wherever you may be. Your work right now is an opportunity for you to reflect God so that in every place on earth, His presence is felt and His purpose is accomplished. Let me repeat that. You are God's representative in your workplace so that in every place on earth, His presence is felt and His purpose is accomplished. With this in your heart, you can find fulfillment in whatever you may be doing. And so no matter the external circumstances may be, like low pay, long hours, or hard work, you can find meaning in your work because you have a bigger role in the scheme of all things. For you are God's image on earth, reflecting who He is, and this is who we are supposed to be and what the world should be. Now, are you ready to find meaning in your work? Then find delight in your work. Continue the good work that God has already done and make it flourish. Most of all, integrate your faith and work by being God's representative in your workplace and be an agent of change. Now, I'll be the one to tell you that this is no easy task to be an agent of change if you are a minority in your workplace. I mean, how can you change an organization when those around you are far from embodying the image of God? But in Genesis 1 verse 28 says, be fruitful and multiply. You see, the reason we are to multiply in this world is because we cannot do it alone. It takes a community to change the world. God did not just create a select few to be His image bearers, to have dominion of His creation. Instead, He made us all in His image and likeness. We are to multiply and be a community of image bearers of God in changing the world to make it flourish. Now, in changing our workplace, we are not to procreate there and multiply, okay? The good news is we can multiply by bearing the image of Christ in our workplace. Colossians 1:15 says this, Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. In Christ, we get to know what it is like to be the true image bearers of God. And so we are to imitate Christ in this life. in the workplace or in the context that we are in, we are to be Christ like to others, loving them as we love God. We share the gospel of Jesus Christ to them through our lives. We don't need to preach in words, instead, we demonstrate the gospel through our actions. After all, action speaks louder than words, right? And as we imitate Christ in our workplace, they begin to wonder, what is it that you have? Why is it that you have joy in work? That no matter the hardships that you are facing, you are fulfilled in what you are doing. And that you are a shining light in your workplace, showing everyone what it is like to be a good citizens in God's kingdom. And so, when they finally ask you, why is it that you have joy at work? Then you share to them the life that you have received through the grace of God through Jesus Christ. And in sharing to them the gospel, you are no longer just one in your workplace, but become two, then three, then four, and many more. You become a community of image bearers of Christ in changing your workplace. Therefore, let us integrate our faith in all areas of our lives by being image bearers of Christ and be an agent of change. Thank you, everyone. I hope you were blessed with this message. Thank you, and God bless.